All right, good afternoon, traders. This is Christian from Hertz Tribeca at Trade Group, and it is Monday, October 14th, beginning of the week. And Columbus Day bond market was closed today. So, as you can imagine, coming into work today in New York City, looked like kind of a ghost town a little bit. And that's kind of how the market traded today, mostly in a tight range. We did see some names and some groups trend a little bit. It seemed like a lot of I don't want to say all beaten up names, but some names that haven't been participating, saw a little bit of, kind of move from the lows. I'll go over that but it wasn't just that, I would say. AMD, which had a follow through move, kind of had some momentum to it on Friday, caught pretty nicely. But anyway, risk disclaimer, everything that we're going over today, obviously, in the end of day videos for information purposes only, not giving out any investment advice or recommendations. So here's the range that we were in all day long. Again, very, very tight, a little bit different than what we saw on Friday, where we rallied and then had that late day sell off to kind of finish around the open as well. So where does this kind of take us for the S&P? At a pretty interesting pivot point. We're at the bottom of value for the month. And we'll see. I would still kind of call this digestion from late last week. We had three big green candles there Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So I'm okay with a small digestion day. And we'll see if we can continue. Maybe tomorrow's it's the 15th of the month. So maybe sometimes in the middle of the month, sometimes some new money is put in the market, sometimes not. But yeah, I mean, I think a little bit of digestion is normal. Down, what do we finish? S&P futures down 15 basis points. Not really a big deal. TLT I thought was interesting. Pretty much stayed in the green all day long today, up 70 basis points. You could see it kind of churned higher, but not so much from the open. That's why there's a small red bar from where we opened. It was bid up a little bit pre-market on. Remember all the trade talk stuff this morning. So you could see from the open, down just a little bit, but kind of grinded from the low of 10 o'clock. Looking at other areas of the market, and then we'll talk about some individual names and some groups. But this was kind of a being that the S&P was in this very tight range. What happens when this happens, especially after a big event that we got through towards the end of last week? A little bit of volatility crush, right? The VIX moved down quite a bit. It was down 5% this week. That doesn't, unless you're selling premium, it's not going to help your options out. Those can be very difficult days if you're sitting long a lot of premium. Here's what the VIX looks like at this point. Continues to, you could make this conclusion, I think, that it's been making lower highs whenever we see one of these bursts, maybe not here, but here, here, and here. And then again, what this was last week. So we've been fading pretty decently in the VIX and are under 15 again. And, when the market is not moving, when this happens, again, you're going to see a pretty decent volatility crush. I'll give you an example. I was short some XLU. I mentioned this on Friday. I don't do a lot of shorting in uptrends, but I just thought this XLU might come in a little bit. And I was able to hit my first target in this on Friday, right around in this range. And notice that XLU is lower, but my puts that I have on are actually worth less than where I hit that first target. Why is that? Because I don't have that much theta decay. It's a November position, so it is a decent amount of theta decay every day. But I'm long the November 63 puts, and they're marking again here. I was able to take a target at 83 cents. Today they're marking at 71, even though the price of the ETF is lower, which means I should be profiting from the stock or the ETF going lower and holding puts. But however, all that theta decay, all that implied volatility coming out of the ETF is not going to help your cause. So I will keep this trade on maybe one more day, because I think you could have maybe one more day of downside in XLU before you hit some support. But that's kind of how a lot of options, if you were holding overnight, you're going to actually lose, even if, again, I try to illustrate this point as much as possible. But remember, you need you need an aggressive move that has to happen in your direction. And again, more than XLU was down almost 3/4%, and you need a bigger move than that. Sometimes especially when you have that go on for the day, where the VIX is down 5% on the day. But I do think if we go back to the performers for the day, you had OIH was your best performer after the open, even though it was still down on the day. Biotech I thought was pretty interesting, although that didn't basically close on the highs. It gave back a lot of the gains that it saw. But that was a group that I thought was interesting. And then if you notice, the worst performers on the day were those defensive groups. So we'll see if that continues. That was kind of in the face of a stronger TLT. But remember, those groups kind of held up pretty well last week when bonds got hit really hard. So, maybe a little bit of a catch-up move. I talk about that a lot in the trading room, where it's not exactly a one-for-one relationship. Sometimes, believe it or not, when bonds are up, sometimes banks will actually rally, and sometimes utilities will actually go down. Why is that? Because it's not a one for one or a negative one to relationship to these things. So yeah, and I'll bring up biotech. I'll talk about what we traded a little bit today. But IVB, you can see, really did not hold the gains of where it got to about 12 o'clock. So disappointing. This group has been doing this, where it shows a little bit of signs of life, and then, kind of falls apart a bit. This is what the XBI looks like. It did get into value here for the month of October. It rallied from the lows, but again, it's just, to me, it's not a convincing bounce, and especially when you don't close on the highs, and a group that was amongst the best performers for the majority of the day. So we'll keep an eye on that, but don't love how that really shaked out for the day. Trades, yeah. So I traded pretty light today. I've been doing that. I've had basically a pattern. I've been really lessening my risk. For a couple of reasons. Number one, this environment is just very difficult to trade options. It's just, just like I mentioned with XLU and the vol crush, but we didn't have any major headlines today other than this morning. But it's just been it's been a market with landmines all over the place. So what do I do when it gets more difficult? I just tone down my risk. And you've heard me say that now probably for months, but I just kind of keep toning down my risk. Because I just think it's that much more of a difficult environment. And also, just scalping, I'm just kind of getting away with, not being really greedy. I didn't get the high point of this Alexion. We saw some Alexion calls go up earlier, which I thought was a pretty good signal. For a day trade, there's no way I'm going to keep this trade on. Oops, sorry. Here was the Alexion, nice premium, $1.2 million. But I never know what they're up to. You never know if that's speculation into earnings. But it just looked like this was something that kind of had a possible double bottom and could go, and I made a little bit of money off that. And again, I think I sold in here right before the CNBC pump, which got it up to here. But notice, so yeah, I was kind of like, a little upset that I didn't get the high of the day, because I originally had a target out right around this price, but that's fine. I think really using option activity like this, where you could just do a little quick scalp and then get out of it, because this market is just very hard to own a lot of risk right now. We also saw, and again, being picky and choosy, right? Out of like the 15, 20 different trades that we saw on the tape today, I only took a couple, really try to stay grounded, because I didn't think today was going to be a great day. APA, another name, if you look at the chart, not a horrible risk to reward. Maybe this can rally up to these moving averages, but this name's in a downtrend. It could bounce for a couple more days, but names that are in downtrends, usually it's very hard for them to get out of a downtrend. Usually they bounce and then they resume back to a downtrend, no matter how much call activity is on the tape. And I'll show you that trade too. Whoops. But just so you could see, it was a big block of these that went up. It was a block of 12,500. December 25 calls. That was an opening trade for $750,000 of premium. So anyway, you could use that to your advantage and kind of position either for a day trade. AMD I thought was pretty interesting. I think this a name I had in the member watch list. I don't know from this weekend. I'm trying to remember. I think I had 15 names in there, 1.5, but up 2.6%. Again, this came to life on Friday. Got into value. 31.21 would be the resistance for that's the October value, or maybe you can see one more day of a rally before it hits that resistance. A few other names that we saw today, some interest on the call side. ATVI, again, did not take this trade. Why? Just because I'm being really selective with my trades, but it doesn't look bad. It does have to push through to the top of value, if depending on what your time frame is, but you may want a little bit more confirmation other than just bouncing on the 50-day. Really above 56.06 would be confirmation for me. I mentioned AMD, Tesla. No option activity here, but it's been continuing to act very well. It, believe it or not, closed above the 200-day moving average. It could be onto that VPOC up there at 270, virgin point of control, where a lot of volume was previously, but we haven't revisited. So 370 is another $14 up, but really nice. Again, considering in a choppy market, this Tesla has been acting really nice over the last week. Couple other names, some like again names that just I didn't really see anything, but just had some momentum to them, like the Shoe Carnival. Boot Barn was another one, that acted pretty well. Just so there were some names, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, that had some momentum, but you really had to be, these names probably had to be on your radar beforehand to get involved in them. Just to wrap up the video, I saw a little bit of strength in Amazon. It barely is a blip on the screen. Doesn't really look like anything, but I like to take a look at the 1 hour chart. Notice it's trying, so I would keep an eye on this name for tomorrow. It closed right at the top of value. I put on a tiny trade. Thinking that this can maybe run into earnings, or reports earnings, I think Thursday next week. So, if you're looking to do like a call spread, you would have to basically do it for this week rather than next week, because even if it works, it won't return its value because of the big event that we'll have. So, unless you want to be long outright calls. But I think call spreads, in my opinion, work pretty well for Amazon. So that's a name that I'm watching for tomorrow. I had one other name too that I was looking at, or that I traded. What else did I? Oh, Lulu. I think Lulu was has been a nice trade for me. I bounced back into this thing today, but notice it's right at previous resistance. So, it may consolidate here a bit at that previous resistance, and I just kind of took advantage of a little pop today. And again, really quick, just decided to get out of it, made a little bit of money, and then just left. And again, I think that was the right thing to do. It was looked like it was holding in a little bit, but then all of a sudden kind of broke down. And that's sometimes what happens when names hit previous resistance. Let's see, was there anything else on the option side? A little bit of UNH calls. We'll see how that works for them tomorrow. They report tomorrow morning. I did take a small option trade on that one. GH is another one. I would say for option activity. We've also been seeing a little bit of BHC, just to kind of give you a flavor of what they were interested in today. GH, I think, is at an interesting point. It's trying to break that downtrend line. Again, if you're super disciplined, rather than playing with options, which are going to be really expensive in this name, $63, you could basically use that as your stop. I saw a couple people tweeting about NVTA. These stocks seem to be some of them seem to go in the same pattern, but I actually like the GH a little bit better out of a downward channel. And again, consolidating there a few days. Oh, the last one that I wanted to mention, which we traded to the downside. Nice to find something to kind of trade to the downside, but Beyond Meat may pause here a little bit after four big red candles. It's approaching this earnings gap. So I'm thinking that it might consolidate. Any strength, if we happen to get a strong day for 1 or 2 days, is where I would look to reshort this thing and then maybe see if it can get down to 106 to kind of fill that earnings gap. All right, guys, I'll leave it there. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow.